Long before the tendrils of evil sought purchase in the nascent cosmos, long before the first human heart beat with nascent life upon the verdant sphere of earth, an infinite, unblemished goodness reigned supreme in the heavens. It was an era of untroubled perfection, a symphony of light and love conducted by the Creator, the Father of all. Every angel, a unique spark of the divine, radiated an immense personal light, their existence a continuous hymn of deep reverence and joyous adoration for their source. The celestial realms thrummed with a harmony so profound, so complete, that the very concept of discord was an alien shadow yet uncast. But even in this chorus of unparalleled brilliance, among all the seraphim, cherubim and thrones, one angel stood apart, a beacon of such dazzling magnificence that all other lights, beautiful as they were, seemed to gather and intensify in his presence. This was Lucifer, the morning star, the light-bearer. As the ancient scriptures would one day record, "You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty." Ezekiel 28-12. He was not merely an angel, he was the angel, sculpted first by the Creator's mighty hand, a masterpiece reflecting the zenith of divine artistry. God himself, in his infinite capacity for joy, delighted in this firstborn of his spiritual creation, pouring into him a measure of power, intelligence, and honor that set him above all other created beings. His intellect, second only to the mind of God, could unravel the most intricate designs of the cosmos. His voice could lead the heavenly choirs to new heights of ecstasy, and his presence commanded an admiration that bordered on awe. Lucifer was, in every conceivable way, God's most resplendent creation. He moved through the celestial courts like a living flame, his grace unparalleled, his wisdom sought after by even the most ancient of seraphs. He walked among the fiery stones, the very conduits of divine energy, as a guardian cherub, privy to the deepest secrets of the divine order. Heaven, a realm of perfect structure, where each angelic being fulfilled a mission woven into the fabric of cosmic purpose, saw in Lucifer its most articulate and potent expression of that purpose. The seraphim, burning with unceasing love, would pause their eternal "Holy, holy, holy" to absorb the wisdom that flowed from him. The cherubim, guardians of divine mysteries, respected his profound understanding. Even Michael, the great warrior archangel, known for his unwavering strength and martial prowess, admired Lucifer's keen insight and majestic bearing. It was Lucifer who often organized the grand celestial choirs, his passion for the Creator infusing every note, every paean of praise. His voice, a melody of pure light, guided the harmonies, and his fervor was infectious, inspiring a deeper devotion in all who heard him. He was the standard-bearer, the one who articulated the glory of God with an eloquence that left others breathless. In his perfection, he was a mirror reflecting the Creator's own magnificence back to the heavenly host, and in that reflection, all of heaven rejoiced. But herein lay the subtle, almost imperceptible paradox, the paradox of perfection itself. Lucifer was not flawed, yet his very flawlessness became the fertile ground for an unforeseen vulnerability. The admiration he received, the constant affirmation of his singular brilliance, began to subtly shift his perception. He, who was created to reflect the light, started to feel the warmth of that light, as if it originated from within himself. The seal of perfection began to feel less like a divine imprint and more like an inherent, self-sustaining attribute. He was so perfectly beautiful, so profoundly wise, so immensely powerful, that the line between being a recipient of these gifts and being their source started in the deepest, unarticulated recesses of his being to blur. This was the nascent stage of what theologians would later term self-deification, the created desiring to usurp the uncreated, the reflection aspiring to be the light itself. This was not yet sin, not yet a conscious rebellion. It was a subtle deviation, a minute angling of the soul away from its true north. It began as a fleeting thought during a chorus of praise, My voice leads this harmony to its peak, or a passing reflection while contemplating a cosmic design. My understanding grasps this more fully than any other. These were not untrue statements in their factual sense, but the emphasis, the internal ownership, began to subtly shift. The glory he brought to God started to carry an almost imperceptible echo of his own glory. God, in his omniscience, perceived these nascent stirrings. The Creator, who had poured so much of his love into this magnificent being, felt the first faint cooling of Lucifer's ardor, the first microscopic fissure in his perfect devotion. And with infinite patience, the divine voice, like a gentle stream flowing through the silence of Lucifer's soul, would offer subtle course corrections. My son, the presence of God might impress upon his spirit, all light finds its wellspring in me. Rejoice in the brilliance I have given you, for in it my glory is shared. Lucifer, in these early stages, would receive such divine nudges with outward reverence. He would bow his radiant head, his heart perhaps momentarily warmed by the direct attention of the Father. Yet, deep within, a new kind of reasoning began to take root, a justification cloaked in the very wisdom God had bestowed upon him. Is it not my purpose to explore the fullness of the gifts I have been given? He might muse. To understand to the deepest degree is surely a form of worship. Does not my unique comprehension bring a unique glory to the Creator? This was the true nature of pride, not as a boorish arrogance, but as a distorted truth. He began to believe, with a sincerity that was all the more perilous, that his pursuit of self-excellence, his desire to shine ever brighter, was itself a noble endeavor, a deeper service to the divine. He wasn't seeking to diminish God, not yet. He was seeking, in his own mind, to magnify his own God-given role, unaware that in doing so, he was slowly detaching his role from its divine anchor. The heavens remained a realm of breathtaking harmony. Angels continued their sacred duties, their songs of praise undiminished. But for Lucifer, the morning star, the first, almost invisible shadows were beginning to gather not around him, but within him. The perfect mirror was starting to develop an infinitesimal fascination with its own reflection, a fascination that, if unchecked, threatened to obscure the very source it was meant to display. The freedom God had bestowed, the freedom essential for genuine love and service, also carried within it the profound risk that a being might choose to turn that freedom inward, to make the self, rather than God, the ultimate point of reference. And Lucifer, the brightest of all, was unknowingly treading closer to that precipice. The unblemished dawn of his existence was beginning to show the faintest, almost imperceptible hint of an approaching twilight, born not from external darkness, but from the dazzling, unyielding brilliance of his own light. The subtle shift within Lucifer, that nascent fascination with his own resplendence, did not manifest overnight as overt defiance. Instead, it was a slow, insidious erosion of his primary orientation. The pure, unadulterated joy he once found solely in the contemplation and service of the Creator began to be subtly tinged with a self-referential satisfaction. His duties, once performed with an effortless outpouring of love, now carried an undercurrent of conscious effort, a performance for an audience that increasingly included himself. The other angels, beings of immense spiritual sensitivity, began to notice infinitesimal changes in the morning star. It wasn't a dimming of his light, for his brilliance, if anything, seemed to burn with a new, almost restless intensity. Rather, it was a subtle alteration in its quality. His once open and radiant countenance now sometimes held a veil of introspection, an enigmatic depth that hinted at thoughts unshared. Gabriel, the archangel of divine messages, whose nature was one of pure transmission and clear communication, approached him one day, a flicker of concern in his luminous eyes. "Lucifer, my brother." Gabriel's voice was gentle, yet carried the clarity of a celestial bell. "Your light seems agitated. What burden, if any, weighs upon your heart? Does some new mystery of the Father preoccupy your great mind?" Lucifer turned, his beauty as breathtaking as ever, yet his smile did not quite reach the depths of his gaze. "Dear Gabriel," he replied, his tone smooth, almost too polished, "there are currents in the ocean of divine thought that even we, in our brightness, cannot fully chart. My explorations merely take me to deeper waters." He offered no further elucidation, averting his gaze in a way that subtly discouraged further inquiry. Gabriel felt a faint chill, an unnameable unease, but he was not one to press where reticence was so clearly signaled. He withdrew, the seed of a question planted in his own pure heart. Day by day, Lucifer's internal dialogue grew more complex. The divine whispers of caution, though still present, were increasingly met with his own sophisticated counter-arguments. "If I am the seal of perfection," he would reason internally, "then my own understanding of what is highest and best must surely be valid. To question my own intrinsic discernment would be to question the masterpiece God himself has wrought." This was the insidious logic of pride, using God's gifts as a justification for straying from God's will. His leadership of the heavenly choirs, once his greatest joy, began to feel like a constraint. The repetitive nature of praise, the constant outward focus, started to chafe against his burgeoning desire for something more. What that more was, he could not yet fully articulate, but it involved a recognition, an elevation that seemed to transcend the established hierarchies. He began to attend the great praise gatherings with a distracted air, his gaze often fixed on the highest point of heaven, a look of mixed longing and resentment flickering in his eyes. His voice, though still magnificent, sometimes lacked the pure, selfless abandon it once possessed. The other angels felt it as a subtle dissonance, a missing star in their perfectly aligned constellation of worship. One of the seraphim, whose existence was a continuous flame of love for the Creator, approached him during a period of celestial quiet. "Lucifer," the seraph asked, its voice like the gentle crackling of holy fire, "do you no longer find the fullness of joy in singing the Father's praises? Your melody seems distant." Lucifer turned, a cool smile playing on his lips. "Joy takes many forms, Radiant One," he responded, his voice carefully modulated. "Perhaps there are harmonies yet undiscovered, glories yet unrevealed, that require a different kind of pursuit. Have we truly explored all that we can be?" The seraph, unaccustomed to such ambiguity from the usually forthright morning star, felt a tremor of disquiet. The question hung in the luminous air, unsettling and profound. Heaven operated on clear principles of divine order, yet it was an order maintained not by chains, but by the free ascent of love. God had bestowed upon each angel the precious, perilous gift of free will, the capacity to choose to love and serve, or not. And as Lucifer wrestled internally between his innate light and the growing shadow of his self-conceived grandeur, the angels around him began to sense the tension of his unspoken choice. Some, dazzled by his undiminished greatness, by the sheer force of his intellect and charisma, started to listen to his nuanced pronouncements with new, uncritical ears. They saw not the nascent pride, but what they perceived as a bolder, more profound understanding of their potential. Silently, almost unconsciously, a faction began to form, drawn to his gravitational pull, as if his light could indeed lead them to a destiny beyond what they had always known. Meanwhile, God, in his infinite patience and sorrow, continued to extend his grace. He knew the fragility of the freedom he had granted, understood how, even in the purest soil, seeds of pride could germinate, if not met with humility. He called Lucifer to himself again, not in judgment, but in love. "Lucifer, my son, my morning star." The divine presence enveloped him, a love so vast it could have dissolved mountains of pride. "I sense your thoughts straying. In your heart, ideas are growing that create a distance from the eternal spring of your being. The light I placed within you, a reflection of my love, you are beginning to perceive as your own intrinsic source. Lucifer knelt, his outward posture one of humility, but within him a fire of incomprehension and wounded pride began to burn. "Father," his voice was serene, yet a new defensiveness laced its edges. "Did you not create me to understand, to explore the very limits of what you have made? Is it wrong to desire to comprehend the full depth of your work? My light, the very gift you gave me, how could I turn away from it if it was fashioned by your own will to be so magnificent?" God's sadness was profound, a sorrow ancient and deep, though contained within his immense and patient heart. "Your desire to understand is noble, Lucifer," God continued gently. "But your thoughts are becoming self-centered. You are being seduced by the beauty I placed within you, forgetting it is a reflection, not the origin. Remember, my son, from whence all true light emanates. Do not let your heart be shrouded by the shadow of your own splendor. Turn fully to me, and your light will grow in truth, and together our communion will be greater than any solitary ambition." But Lucifer, instead of feeling the balm of this divine love, felt a sting. He perceived not mercy, but a subtle questioning of his capacity, his loyalty. Why so many warnings? Does he not trust my inherent ability to remain faithful, to manage the gifts he has given? He withdrew with a formal bow, but the invisible chasm within him had widened. His heart, once a clear pool reflecting the divine, was becoming clouded by the sediments of self-will. The divine warning, intended as a lifeline, was perversely interpreted by his burgeoning pride as further evidence of his unique, perhaps even misunderstood, stature. He was no longer simply God's masterpiece. He was becoming, in his own estimation, a being whose trajectory even God seemed to regard with a special, almost anxious concern. The path to open rebellion was not yet trod, but the internal signposts were now unmistakably pointing in that perilous direction. The cooling of devotion was becoming a chill, and the whispers of self were growing into a compelling, insistent voice that promised a glory yet unknown, a glory he was beginning to believe he could, and perhaps should, claim for himself. The Creator, witnessing Lucifer's increasing drift, felt a sorrow that resonated through the very fabric of heaven. It was the grief of a father anticipating the loss of his most cherished son, a pain made sharper by the knowledge that this son possessed every gift necessary for eternal joy, yet was choosing a path leading to unimaginable desolation. God's mercy, however, was as infinite as his being. He would not abandon Lucifer to his burgeoning pride without every possible overture of love and guidance. In his infinite wisdom, God knew that a great revelation was approaching, a moment that would test the allegiance of every celestial being, a truth so profound it would demand an unprecedented level of humility and obedience. This revelation, he foresaw, would be particularly challenging for a spirit like Lucifer, whose sense of self-importance was becoming dangerously inflated. Therefore God, in an act of profound paternal care, chose to delay this pivotal moment. He wanted to give Lucifer more time, more space to prepare his heart, to re-anchor himself in humility, to strengthen the bonds of loyalty that were fraying under the strain of his ambition. He spoke to Lucifer again, not in the grand assembly of angels, but in the sacred silence where spirit communes directly with spirit. "My son," the divine voice was imbued with an almost aching tenderness. "A great unveiling approaches, a truth that will shake the firmament. When it comes, the winds of testing will be strong. The tensions in your heart will be intense, like a storm tearing through the sky. You must prepare yourself. Root yourself deeply in obedience, in the love that first gave you being, for the trial will be great." Lucifer listened, and for a moment, a flicker of his former sincerity seemed to surface. He knelt before the divine presence, his magnificent form bowed, his gaze fixed on the unutterable light of the Creator. "Father," his voice, though soft, carried a resonance that hinted at an internal struggle. "Whatever the test may be, my deepest desire is to obey your commands. I cannot promise that my understanding will always be perfect, or that my strength will never waver, But I swear to you, my will is to be loyal. My heart still burns with the love you ignited within me." These words were not, in that instant, a deliberate deception. Lucifer genuinely believed them, or at least a significant part of him did. A genuine desire to remain faithful still flickered within his soul, a testament to the profound goodness with which he had been created. Yet, simultaneously, in a darker, more shadowed corner of his mind, the insidious seed of pride continued its relentless growth. He felt, with an unshakable conviction, that he, among all angels, was special, unique, inherently capable of navigating any trial. "Am I not the morning star, the one who shines most brightly? Surely my capacity to withstand this test will be exemplary," he thought silently, even as his lips spoke of obedience. The duality was tearing him apart, though he was not yet fully conscious of the schism. God, in his all-knowing patience, perceived both the sincerity and the encroaching shadow. He gave Lucifer another chance, a further postponement of the great revelation. He allowed him more time, more space, hoping against hope that Lucifer would use this reprieve to draw nearer, to seek humility, to cleanse his heart of the subtle toxins of self-aggrandizement. "Lucifer," the divine voice impressed upon him once more, "this test will not be easy. Even when it seems the celestial winds are carrying you away from what you have known, you must remember your origin, your essence. You must remember that all light, all glory, all truth comes from me and finds its fulfillment in me." Lucifer's internal struggle, though unique in its celestial scale, mirrored a pattern that would later unfold in the terrestrial paradise of Eden. There, Adam and Eve, created in innocence and placed in a garden of perfect harmony, would also face a test of obedience centered around a single prohibition, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God had given them everything, a world of peace and abundance, but their freedom, their ability to choose, was encapsulated in that one divine boundary. The serpent, who would later be identified with the fallen Lucifer himself, would whisper insidious questions, sowing seeds of doubt and ambition. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Genesis 3:1. The temptation was not a blatant call to evil, but a subtle twisting of truth, an appeal to a perceived injustice, a suggestion that God was withholding something good. "You will not certainly die," the serpent would hiss, "for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Genesis 3:4, -5. This was the very same snare into which Lucifer was slowly, inexorably falling. The serpent's whisper to Eve, "You will be like God," was the echo of the silent, burgeoning desire in Lucifer's own heart, to be more than a reflection, to be a source, to not depend entirely on the Creator, but to achieve a divine-like autonomy. The morning star, the son of dawn, was in grave danger of turning his back on the very light that gave him life, choosing instead to walk towards the tantalizing, self-generated shadow of his own perceived greatness. Free will, God's most precious gift to both angels and humans, proved to be the most vulnerable point, the fulcrum upon which destinies would turn, both in heaven and in Eden. Pride, the desire to be self-sufficient, to be the arbiter of one's own truth, was the key that unlocked the door to downfall. In Lucifer's case, his immense intellect, his unparalleled beauty, the very gifts that set him apart, became the instruments of his temptation. He began to see obedience not as a joyful alignment with divine wisdom, but as a restriction on his own potential, a limitation on his freedom to explore the heights he felt destined to achieve. The perfection of heaven, its seamless order and radiant peace, began to feel to Lucifer almost constricting. He yearned for a stage grander than mere reflection, a role more defining than even first among angels. His interactions with other angels, while still outwardly gracious, carried an increasing air of subtle condescension. He would offer insights, solve celestial complexities with dazzling brilliance, but always with an unspoken subtext. "See how much more I understand? See how my light eclipses all others?" The virtues that had been the pillars of angelic existence, humility, obedience, selfless love began to appear through Lucifer's increasingly distorted lens as somewhat naive, perhaps even as signs of a lesser capacity. He was beginning to formulate a new hierarchy, one based not on proximity to God's will, but on intrinsic brilliance and self-actualized power, a hierarchy in which he, naturally, would reside at the apex. The postponement of the great revelation, intended by God as an act of mercy, was tragically misinterpreted by Lucifer. He saw it not as a chance for repentance, but as an affirmation of his singular importance. Even the unfolding of divine mysteries waits upon my readiness, a part of him reasoned. The disease of pride was metastasizing, twisting love into demand, and reverence into a subtle form of rivalry. Heaven, though still bathed in divine light, unknowingly held its breath. The morning star, crafted for unparalleled glory, was charting a course towards an unimaginable darkness, a darkness born not from the absence of light, but from its proud, solitary, and ultimately self-destructive blaze. The harmony of heaven was about to face its first, devastating fracture, and the echoes of that break would resonate even to the future garden of humanity. The period of postponement, granted by God in his infinite mercy, eventually drew to its ordained close. The Creator, while grieving Lucifer's hardening heart, also had to consider the entirety of his celestial family, the countless angels eagerly awaiting the unfolding of his divine plan. A palpable tension, a deep and solemn expectation, began to permeate the heavens. Every angelic being, from the mightiest seraph burning before the throne to the humblest messenger, sensed that a moment of profound significance was at hand. And then, on a day unlike any other, a day that would forever be etched into the memory of heaven, God gathered his heavenly hosts. All his angels, great and small, legions upon legions, assembled in a vast, luminous convocation that illuminated the firmament with an unimaginable splendor. A silence fell, so profound that the very music of the spheres seemed to pause. All of heaven held its breath, every radiant face turned towards the unutterable presence of the Father. The firmament itself seemed to part, and the glory of God shone forth with an intensity that was both breathtaking and terrifying, a pure, loving light that searched the very essence of every being. Then, like soft thunder rolling through the cosmos, yet intimate as a whisper in each angelic heart, his voice filled the entirety of creation. "My beloved children," the voice of the Creator resonated, "from the boundless depths of my love and wisdom, I shall bring forth a new marvel, a new dimension of my being expressed." A collective gasp of awe rippled through the angelic assembly. "I will create a material universe," God announced, "a vast expanse of stars and nebulae, of galaxies spinning in perfect, intricate order, worlds of fire and ice, of gas and stone, a canvas upon which life, in myriad forms, will flourish, reflecting my glory in ways yet unseen." Before the astonished eyes of the angels, a vision unfolded, a breathtaking panorama of cosmic creation. They saw swirling nebulae coalesce into stars, planets forming from cosmic dust, entire galaxies performing a slow, majestic ballet across the void. It was a spectacle of such grandeur, such intricate beauty, that even their vast intellects struggled to comprehend its full scope. Joy, pure and unadulterated, began to swell in their hearts as they beheld this new facet of the Creator's infinite power and artistry. Everything was new, like a dream they could never have conceived. But then, God continued, and his words took on an even more mysterious, more personal tone. "And within this material universe, upon one of these worlds, a verdant sphere I shall call Earth, I will create beings in my own image and likeness. They shall be called humans. They will be unique, a fusion of spirit and flesh, a bridge between heaven and earth, capable of knowing me and loving me." The angels watched, fascinated, as the vision focused on this nascent earth, a jewel of blue and green. They saw the first humans, innocent and radiant, walking in a paradise garden. A sense of wonder filled them. Then, the Creator unveiled the most staggering part of his plan, a truth so profound, so unexpected, that it would become the ultimate test of faith and humility. And more than this, God's voice resonated with an unfathomable love. In the fullness of time, myself, in the second person of my being, my eternal Son, will take on the very flesh of these humans. He will be born of a woman, live among them, share their joys and sorrows. His name will be Jesus Christ, and in that humanity, fragile and mortal as it will be, you shall worship me. The silence that followed this pronouncement was overwhelming, almost crushing. God, the eternal, the uncreated, the source of all being, was asking them, his pure spiritual creations, to worship him not only in his transcendent divine majesty, but in the humble, limited, and breakable form of a human being. He was asking them to bend their celestial knees before a human face. A wave of awe, confusion, and for many, sheer, unadulterated jubilation swept through the angelic ranks. To see the light of light, the Word through whom all things were made, willingly choose to become flesh, it was an act of love so kenotic, so self-emptying, so sublime, that many angels could not contain their joyous acclamations. They praised the Creator, feeling incredibly privileged to witness such an incomprehensible mystery of divine condescension. It was God's plan in its most unexpected, most radical form, a display of a love that defied all angelic understanding. But the mystery of the Incarnation was not the only revelation that day. God, in his foreknowledge, also revealed the tragic trajectory of humanity. He showed them that these humans, despite being created in his image, would fall into sin, would become corrupted by disobedience, their paradise lost. And because of this fall, because of his infinite love for these flawed and fragile creatures, he, in the person of Jesus Christ, would willingly offer himself as a sacrifice. The vision shifted to a scene of horrifying brutality. The Son of God, scourged, crowned with thorns, nailed to a cross, dying an agonizing death for the sins of humanity he had come to save. This, for many, was a revelation too profound, too painful. The idea of divine majesty subjected to such degradation, such suffering, at the hands of his own creation, was almost unbearable. Yet, even in this, the faithful angels saw the unfathomable depth of God's love, a love that would go to any length to redeem. But amidst the chorus of awe, praise, and even sorrowful wonder, one of the brightest, one of the most powerful, remained utterly motionless: Lucifer. He did not move, he did not speak, he did not cheer. He watched the unfolding visions with a distant, unreadable expression, as if the radiant light of the revelation could not penetrate the intricate fortress of his thoughts. His glorious countenance, usually a beacon of responsive light, was now like a dark, still well, reflecting nothing of the divine glory, only the internal storm that was beginning to rage within him. The idea of bowing to a human form, of worshipping God in the humility of mortal flesh, was, to Lucifer, incomprehensible, almost offensive. Why? The question seared through his mind, a silent scream against the divine decree. Why would perfection itself need to lower itself to such a degree? Why are we, beings of pure light, spiritual fire, asked to venerate a creature of dust and breath, a being destined for corruption and decay? He heard that these humans God would create would ultimately rebel, would turn their backs on their Creator, and knowing this, God would still sacrifice himself for them. The vision of the crucifixion, in particular, was something monstrous to Lucifer. It was this element that made him inwardly explode. These finite, ungrateful, and ultimately self-destructive beings would not only defy their Maker, but they would also kill him in his human form. Lucifer was stunned. Could anything be more absurd, more illogical, he thought. His mind, once a vessel of divine wisdom, now twisting that wisdom into a tool of bitter critique. He observed God's grand, overarching plan not with awe, but with a mixture of disbelief and burgeoning disdain. The mystery of the Incarnation, the revelation that the Creator would take human form in Jesus Christ, had unleashed a tempest within him. And from that tempest, a burning, possessive question emerged, fueled by centuries of cultivated pride. Why not me? For eons, he had been the most beautiful, the closest to the throne, the Creator's acknowledged masterpiece. He possessed the intellect, the splendor, the inherent dignity that, in his own estimation, made him worthy of something far greater than mere angelic service. Why hadn't he been chosen for a unique union, a hypostatic elevation, if such a condescension was to occur? Instead of elevating him, God had chosen to lower himself to the level of human flesh, a form Lucifer now viewed with contempt. From this poisoned thought, bitterness was born, a cold, coiling serpent of resentment that began to suffocate every last trace of the pure love and profound respect he had once held for the Father. The great revelation, intended to unite all creation in a new hymn of praise, had instead become, for Lucifer, the ultimate stumbling block, the intolerable offense that would ignite the flames of an unimaginable rebellion. The stage was set for a choice that would fracture heaven and echo through eternity. In that moment, as the echoes of the great revelation reverberated through the stunned silence of heaven, everything crumbled within Lucifer. The carefully constructed edifice of his pride, buttressed by years of self-admiration and subtle rebellion, now shattered under the weight of God's declared plan. The idea of bowing to a human form, of worshipping the Creator in the humility of mortal flesh, and especially the vision of that divine Son suffering a humiliating death for a flawed and ungrateful humanity. It was not merely incomprehensible. It was, to his way of thinking, an abdication of divine dignity, an affront to the very nature of perfection. Why should perfection abase itself for imperfection? Why should eternal spirit kneel before transient flesh? The thoughts, no longer silent, began to boil within him, a toxic brew of indignation and wounded vanity. He, Lucifer, the morning star, the pinnacle of angelic creation, was being asked to venerate a being he considered infinitely inferior, a being destined to betray its own creator. The inherent illogic, the sheer unreasonableness of it, from his skewed perspective, was intolerable. The celestial assembly remained in a state of awed contemplation. One by one, angels of every rank, from the fiery seraphim to the dutiful thrones and dominions, began to kneel, their hearts overwhelmed by the depth of God's love, their spirits surrendering in adoration to this baffling, beautiful mystery of the Incarnation. The air hummed with the soft rustle of countless wings, folding in reverence, a symphony of humble ascent. But Lucifer remained standing, rigid. His magnificent form, usually fluid with grace, was now a pillar of defiance. His luminous eyes, no longer reflecting the divine glory, were fixed on the symbolic representation of God's throne, yet they burned with a cold, internal fire, the fire of silent, unyielding hatred. Slowly, deliberately, he opened his lips. The sound that emerged was not a shout of rage, but a single word, uttered with a chilling, devoid of emotion clarity that cut through the reverent hush of heaven like a shard of ice. Number. The word, simple yet absolute, resonated like a thunderclap in the sudden, absolute silence that followed. Every kneeling angel froze, heads lifted, eyes wide with disbelief and a dawning horror. How could this be? How could Lucifer, the light-bearer, the one closest to the divine effulgence, utter such a word in the very presence of the Almighty? God, whose presence was an ocean of sorrowful love, looked upon his fallen masterpiece. There was no anger in that gaze, only an immeasurable sadness, a profound grief for a choice freely made, a potential for eternal glory freely discarded. But Lucifer, blinded by his own incandescent pride, perceived in that divine sorrow not love, but a confirmation of his own superior reasoning. He felt nothing but a chilling disdain for what he now considered a flawed divine plan. He took a deep, deliberate breath, drawing himself up to his full, majestic height. Then he repeated the word, this time with a force that seemed to shake the very foundations of the celestial realm, a voice infused with the arrogance of a king, pronouncing an immutable judgment upon a lesser. No, the angels present physically shuddered. Many recoiled as if struck. The sheer audacity, the unmitigated rebellion in that single, amplified syllable was beyond their comprehension. How could the purest, the most beautiful, the wisest of all angels so brazenly defy the Creator himself? How dared he disobey a direct divine revelation? Lucifer then slowly turned his gaze from the throne, sweeping it across the stunned multitude of his angelic brethren. With a terrifying, regal calm, he began to address them, his voice, once the lead in heavenly praise, now a chilling instrument of seductive dissent. Brothers, sisters, beings of pure light and eternal spirit, his voice, still charismatic, still resonant with an undeniable authority, filled the celestial space. Do you not realize the magnitude of the error being proposed? Can you not see that what God asks of us is an absurdity, a degradation of our very essence? He paused, letting his words sink in, his gaze piercing, compelling. He asks us to worship an inferior form, to bend our celestial knees before mortal flesh, before a creature made of dust, prone to corruption and sin. This is not glory, my brethren. This is humiliation. We, who were crafted from the pure fire of his thought, are being asked to venerate a being that will not only fail, but will ultimately betray and murder its own incarnate God. Is this wisdom? Is this justice? Each word, laden with his immense intelligence and twisted logic, was expertly crafted to sow seeds of doubt, to disturb the peace that had once been the bedrock of their existence. He spoke not as a raving madman, but as a concerned leader, a wise counselor pointing out a dangerous, irrational path. God asks the unacceptable of us, Lucifer continued, his voice now tinged with an icy passion. We are not the ones who must accept this cosmic folly. It is God himself who has perhaps faltered, who has taken a path that diminishes his own glory, and by extension, ours. Why should we, the firstborn of his creation, bow to something so demonstrably beneath us? We who were made of pure light should occupy a higher place, not debase ourselves before the transient and the flawed. The angels listened, bewildered, captivated. His words, stripped of their rebellious core, seemed so logical, so full of reason, so protective of their angelic dignity. In some, particularly those who had long admired Lucifer's brilliance and perhaps harbored their own subtle dissatisfactions or unvoiced ambitions, the seeds of rebellion began to germinate. Is he not right? A whisper of doubt began to circulate. Is this truly what our Creator demands? Lucifer, with the magnetic charisma that had always been his most potent gift, looked at them one by one, his face a mask of cold determination, yet his eyes burning with a persuasive fervor. He spoke of their inherent worth, of the splendor of their being. He did not at this stage overtly attack God's goodness, but rather questioned the wisdom of this particular plan, framing it as a tragic misstep that threatened to unravel the very fabric of heavenly order. But as his seductive oratory reached its crescendo, as more angelic faces began to show signs of wavering, of considering his poisonous logic, a new voice suddenly cut through the charged atmosphere. It was not a voice of comparable grandeur to Lucifer's, nor did it possess his eloquent cadence. It was a voice clear, strong, and utterly unshakable, a cry that erupted from a heart overflowing with pure, unadulterated conviction and simplicity. Who is like God? The voice belonged to Michael, the archangel, not the highest in the celestial hierarchy, not imbued with Lucifer's dazzling intellect or captivating beauty, but a being whose purity of heart and unwavering loyalty shone with an incomparable diamond-hard strength. His exclamation, just 3 powerful words in their original celestial tongue, Mikael, pierced through the assembly like a sword of divine light. In that single challenging cry, Michael had answered all of Lucifer's sophisticated arguments, had exposed the fundamental flaw in his entire edifice of pride. Who is like God? It was not a question seeking an answer, but a declaration of ultimate truth, a profound statement of humility, an absolute recognition that no created being, not even the morning star in all his splendor, could ever rival, question, or presume to correct the infinite wisdom and goodness of the Creator. The assembled angels trembled. Michael's words, so simple, so direct, so utterly devoid of guile or ambition, awakened something deep within them, reminding them of who they were, from whence they came, and to whom they owed their very existence, their light, their joy. The seductive fog of Lucifer's rhetoric began to dissipate before the blazing sun of that unshakable truth. Lucifer, upon hearing that cry, whirled to face Michael, his magnificent features contorted in a momentary flash of icy fury mixed with a flicker of genuine surprise. Until that moment, no one had ever dared to challenge him so openly, so directly. His authority, his intellectual superiority, had always been an accepted, almost unassailable fact of heavenly life. Michael stepped forward, physically smaller than the towering Lucifer, yet radiating an aura of indomitable courage and righteous conviction. He did not flinch before the morning star's furious gaze. The lines of battle, once unseen, were now starkly, irrevocably drawn. Heaven, the realm of eternal peace, stood on the precipice of its first and most devastating war. The echo of Michael's defiant cry, "Who is like God?" still hung heavy in the celestial air, a tangible barrier against Lucifer's seductive sophistry. The morning star, momentarily stunned by the directness of the challenge, quickly regained his composure, his surprise hardening into a cold, contemptuous fury. His luminous eyes, now narrowed, fixed on Michael with an intensity that could have withered lesser spirits. "You, little archangel," Lucifer's voice dripped with scorn, though he maintained an outward semblance of regal disdain. "You, who have ever been content with simple obedience, what can you possibly understand of the profound complexities at play here? Do you not see the degradation inherent in this plan?" Michael stood his ground, his form radiating a quiet, unwavering strength. He did not possess Lucifer's towering stature or his dazzling, multifaceted brilliance, but his light was pure, steady, and unyielding, like a beacon in a gathering storm. "I see a love that surpasses understanding, Lucifer." Michael's voice was calm, yet it carried a conviction that resonated with the loyal angels, fortifying their resolve. "I see a humility in our Creator that you, in your magnificence, have deemed weakness. Your heart has become proud, Lucifer, on account of your beauty, and you have corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor." He quoted the very words that would one day be recorded by prophets, words that now struck Lucifer with the force of a divine judgment. "You are arrogant," Michael continued, his words not shouted, but delivered with the precision of a perfectly aimed sword. "Your light, once a reflection of the divine, has become a shadow, attempting to eclipse the very source from which it came. Can you not see? You have placed yourself, your judgment, your desires, above God himself." A visible tremor ran through Lucifer. Michael's words, devoid of ornamentation, yet laden with irrefutable truth, had pierced through his layers of self-deception. For a fleeting instant, a look of profound pain, of recognition, flickered across Lucifer's features, the agony of a soul confronted with its own deviation from the good. But pride, now a deeply entrenched fortress, quickly reasserted its dominion. The pain was instantly transmuted into a searing rage, a desperate need to reaffirm his own perceived righteousness. "Understand nothing," Lucifer retorted, his voice rising, the carefully controlled calm beginning to crack. "Are you all so blind that you cannot perceive the humiliation we are being asked to embrace? I, who was first in his glory, the masterpiece of his creation, cannot, will not, kneel before something so intrinsically inferior, so destined for failure and betrayal. It is a betrayal of our very nature, of the dignity he himself bestowed upon us. His words, though still powerful, now carried an undeniable undercurrent of contained fury and bitter resentment. The mask of reasoned dissent was slipping, revealing the raw, wounded pride beneath. Michael looked at him, his gaze steady, compassionate, yet unyielding. His voice, though quiet, seemed to possess the force of 1,000 righteous storms. "You misunderstand love, Lucifer. This is not about humiliation. It is about a love so profound it chooses to bridge the infinite gap between creator and creature. God becomes flesh not to diminish himself, but to elevate us, to share his very life with beings of dust. You reject him because you cannot bear the thought of being in any way lesser. You have forgotten your place. You have forgotten that all you are, all your splendor, is but a reflection of his infinite glory. It is not God who lowers himself, Lucifer. It is your pride that seeks to elevate you beyond your own created being, beyond truth itself." Lucifer felt as if he couldn't bear it. It was as if Michael was holding up a flawless mirror, and the image reflected was not the glorious, self-sufficient deity he was aspiring to be, but a distorted, resentful shadow, consumed by envy and an insatiable hunger for preeminence. He couldn't withstand the weight of that truth, of that unshakable, selfless love Michael so fiercely defended. Without another word, his face a mask of cold, unutterable fury, Lucifer turned away. He distanced himself from Michael, from the divine presence, from all who watched in horrified silence. His back was straight, his bearing still regal, but inside an uncontainable anger burned, the rage of a being exposed, of a pride mortally wounded. Alone, for a moment in the vastness of heaven, Lucifer wept. Not tears of sorrow, not tears of repentance, but tears of pure, unadulterated rage, of a growing hatred born from his humiliated pride. How dare Michael? How dare that lesser angel, that simple soldier, challenge him, the brightest of all? Yet, deep within, a faint, agonizing voice whispered that Michael was right, and this truth, this undeniable, searing truth, tormented him the most. Recovering his composure with chilling speed, Lucifer turned back to the angelic assembly. His momentary vulnerability was gone, replaced by an icy resolve. His voice, now lower, more conspiratorial, yet charged with an intense, almost hypnotic conviction, addressed those whose faces still showed signs of doubt or sympathy. "Can you not see?" he began again, his tone now one of urgent, almost desperate persuasion, "that God asks the impossible of us. He asks us to renounce who we are, to betray our own glorious nature, to kneel before an inferior form, a creature of clay that will inevitably defile itself and its creator." He gestured with a sweep of his magnificent hand towards the vision of the suffering Christ. Are we glorious, immortal beings supposed to worship that? A broken, bloodied body, covered in wounds, suffering beyond measure for a race that will spit upon him. Does this not defy all logic, all reason? His words, carefully chosen, played on their innate sense of dignity, their aversion to suffering, their understanding of divine majesty. More and more angels began to murmur amongst themselves. "Lucifer is right," some whispered. "God cannot ask us to do something that so clearly defies the established order, that diminishes his own perfection." Doubt, once a seed, was now a creeping vine, beginning to choke the roots of faith in many angelic hearts. What if God is not entirely God? A truly blasphemous thought dared to surface in some minds. What if he is merely a very powerful, perhaps even flawed, celestial being, a greater Lucifer, but a Lucifer nonetheless? Lucifer pressed his advantage, his gaze intense and burning, boring into his wavering brethren. Many felt a powerful, almost irresistible truth in his words. He didn't speak of overt hatred for God, not yet. He didn't call for violence. He spoke of their dignity, of the greatness of their existence, of their right, even their duty, to preserve it against what he framed as an irrational, self-destructive divine decree. He spoke of freedom, of independence, of becoming something beyond what they had always been. He painted a vision of a heaven where their own individual talents and light would be recognized and celebrated without the constraint of absolute subordination, a realm where they would not have to bow to any being they deemed inferior. God has given us free will, he proclaimed, his voice ringing with a false promise of liberation. So why not exercise it fully? Why not be who we truly are, in all our potential glory, unburdened by decrees that defy our very nature? With each gathering, with each persuasive speech delivered in secluded corners of heaven, his army grew. It was not primarily the lesser angels, the easily swayed, who flocked to his banner. Tragically, it was often the most beautiful, the wisest, those in whom God had invested great power and beauty, who found his arguments most compelling. Lucifer chose them carefully, seeking out those who, like him, yearned for something more, those whose own brilliance made them susceptible to the allure of greater autonomy. Heaven's most radiant beings, once the crown jewels of creation, began to form the nucleus of the rebel army. They were creatures of such inherent perfection, such dazzling light, that their defection was a profound tragedy, a tearing of the most beautiful tapestries in the celestial realm. And now, that glorious light was beginning to darken, to take on the ominous, shadowy hues of rebellion. At one such clandestine assembly, Lucifer stood before his growing host, his presence commanding, his eyes blazing with a feverish ambition. "We are the future," he proclaimed, his voice echoing like distant, ominous thunder. "We are the light that refuses to kneel to shadow. We will not allow our essence to be dimmed, our dignity to be compromised beneath the yoke of an inferior form, under a plan that defies all reason. If God will not grant us the place our inherent greatness deserves, then we shall take it ourselves." His words burned with such fervor, such unshakable certainty, that every angel present felt a tremor run through their spiritual core. He spoke with a conviction that made them question everything they had ever known, everything they had ever believed. Thus, under his charismatic and now openly defiant leadership, Lucifer's army began to take shape. Each of his followers was like a falling star, a beauty twisted and transformed into a weapon of rebellion. The angels who had once been the most loyal, the most respected, the most beloved, now rose as the first army in heaven's long and peaceful history. In their hearts burned the fires of ambition, pride, and the false promise of a freedom that, deep down, was a chain forged by their own vanity. The firmament, once a symphony of perfect harmony and unadulterated peace, now trembled with the discordant echoes of impending war. In a different corner of heaven, Michael, the small archangel who had fearlessly defied the morning star, rose steadfast and determined. His sword, not yet drawn for battle but held ready, seemed to gleam with a divine resolve. He cried out once more, his voice a rallying call to the faithful who still wavered, "Who is like God?" And that exclamation, simple yet infinitely powerful, awakened those who still hesitated, pulling them back from the precipice of rebellion. Michael, with unmatched humility and a strength born not of self but of divine empowerment, stood before his own gathering host, far smaller in number but united in their unwavering loyalty, ready to defend the Creator's honor. He knew his forces were likely outmatched in sheer numbers, and perhaps even in the individual power of many of Lucifer's chosen. But he never wavered. His faith was his shield, his loyalty his unbreakable weapon. Thus, in heaven, the war between light and shadow, between pride and humility, between rebellion and obedience, was about to reach its terrible climax. Lucifer, the most beautiful angel, the morning star, had fully transformed his glorious light into a raging fire of rebellion, a conflagration that would forever mark and scar the history of creation. The first battle was about to be fought, not against external foes, but between brothers, And with each anticipated blow, each impending clash of celestial wills, the heavens themselves seemed to crack, and the nascent universe held its breath in fearful anticipation. The fragile peace of heaven, already fractured by Lucifer's defiance and the growing schism, finally shattered. The rebellion, no longer a matter of whispered dissent or clandestine gatherings, erupted into open, cataclysmic warfare. It was a conflict unlike any the cosmos had ever witnessed or would ever witness again. A war fought not with material weapons of destruction, but with the very essence of spiritual power, with a fury that shook the foundations of the celestial realms. On one side stood the rebel army, a third of heaven's hosts, led by Lucifer, his once radiant splendor now cloaked in an unnerving, shadowy luminescence, his light twisted into a terrifying, destructive force. His magnificent features were hardened by an unyielding resolve, his eyes burning with a cold, ambitious fire. He was no longer the morning star heralding the dawn, but a dark sun threatening to consume all in its path. His followers, many of them angels of immense power and former glory, seraphim whose love had turned to rage, cherubim whose wisdom had been corrupted into cunning, thrones and dominions whose authority now served ambition, mirrored his terrible transformation. Their light, once pure and life-giving, now pulsed with a discordant, aggressive energy. Facing them, though perhaps fewer in number, were the faithful angels, led by Michael the archangel. His form, though less imposing than Lucifer's, blazed with an unshakable, righteous light. He was the embodiment of humble strength, his resolve forged in unwavering faith and absolute love for the Creator. Beside him stood Gabriel, his trumpet now a battle horn, and Raphael, whose healing light now offered solace to the loyal. The faithful legions, though diverse in their angelic orders, were united by a singular purpose: to defend the honor of God and preserve the sanctity of heaven. The battle commenced with a deafening roar that was not sound, but a tearing of the spiritual fabric. The armies clashed like two immense waves of fire and thunder, light against shadow, loyalty against rebellion. Each blow, each parrying of spiritual force, each crossing of light-forged swords, created incandescent flashes that momentarily lit up the embattled heavens like a storm of shooting stars engaged in a fierce, desperate dance. It was a conflict of unimaginable intensity, where will clashed against will, where devotion met defiance in a maelstrom of spiritual energy. The fallen angels, those who had once graced the celestial courts with unparalleled beauty and power, fought with a desperate, almost nihilistic fury. Having cast their lot with Lucifer, they were driven by a potent cocktail of wounded pride, misguided loyalty to their charismatic leader, and perhaps a dawning, terrifying realization of the irrevocable nature of their choice. They wielded their God-given powers with a destructive abandon, their battle cries echoing with a chilling blend of former glory and present rage. But the faithful angels, though perhaps less ostentatious in their display of power, battled with a quiet, unyielding determination. Their strength was not born of arrogance or ambition, but was drawn directly from the inexhaustible wellspring of divine love and righteous conviction. They fought not for personal glory, but to uphold truth, to defend the innocent harmony of their home. Michael, the archangel once deemed lesser by the prideful Lucifer, advanced at the forefront of his brethren, his battle cry a constant, unwavering reaffirmation of divine supremacy. Who is like God? Michael's true strength lay not in his celestial rank or his inherent splendor, but in the absolute purity of his faith. He fought not for his own honor, but because he knew, with every fiber of his being, that goodness, light, and truth were intrinsically aligned with the Creator. In that unshakable certainty, his power seemed to multiply, his every action guided by a divine grace that made him more than a match for even the most formidable of Lucifer's lieutenants. The faithful angels, fighting alongside him, felt enveloped in a tangible divine power, a protective aura that reminded them they were not alone. The Creator was with them, his silent, sustaining presence, giving them a strength that surpassed any mere angelic force. Lucifer, enraged by the steadfast resistance, and particularly by Michael's unwavering defiance, sought him out amidst the swirling chaos of battle. He rose on his vast, shadowy wings, exhaling a miasma of spiritual darkness that sought to envelop and demoralize those who looked upon him. "I was the first," he thundered, his voice a distorted parody of its former majesty. "I am the true light, the rightful heir to glory. You fight for a diminished God, for a future of degradation." But his words, once so persuasive, now rang hollow, empty, a dark echo of the luminous truth he had forsaken. The light within him, though still undeniably powerful, was a warped, self-consuming shadow, and his power, though formidable, could not eclipse the simple, unadorned truth that Michael held aloft like a pure, unwavering flame. "Your light is false, Lucifer," Michael's voice cut through the din. "It is born of pride, not love. It seeks to devour, not illuminate. God's glory is found in humility, in sacrifice, a truth your arrogance can never comprehend." Their individual combat was the epicenter of the celestial war. A terrible, beautiful, and tragic duel. Light sword clashed against shadow blade, will against corrupted will. Around them, the battle raged, a heartbreaking tapestry of brother against brother, friend against former friend. Angels who had once sung praises together in perfect harmony now sought to unmake each other. The heavens themselves seemed to weep, the very stars dimming as if in sorrow at the sight of such celestial fratricide. The peace that had been heaven's core, its very essence, was shattered, and the once perfect divine order teetered on the brink of unimaginable ruin. Yet, even amidst the devastation, hope stood firm. The unwavering faith of the loyal angels, their profound love for God, shone through every defensive maneuver, every righteous blow they struck. Their resilience was a testament to the enduring power of goodness. They were not fighting to conquer or to destroy, but to restore, to protect, to reaffirm the eternal truth of God's sovereignty. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the tide began to turn. The frenzied, pride-fueled attacks of the rebel angels, though initially overwhelming, began to falter against the steadfast, divinely empowered defense of the loyalists. Lucifer's forces, driven by self-interest and a charismatic but ultimately hollow leader, lacked the unifying, sustaining power of selfless devotion. Their internal cohesion began to fray. At last, the decisive moment arrived. Michael, his form blazing with a concentrated divine light, pressed his advantage against Lucifer. With a final mighty surge of power, his sword raised high, he uttered the battle's concluding words, a divine judgment channeled through a humble servant. "By the power of Almighty God, fall, Lucifer." In that instant, the shadowy darkness around Lucifer seemed to split asunder. A cry of unimaginable anguish, a sound that was not a sound but a tearing of the spirit, ripped from the morning star. The rebellion, once so fierce, so seemingly unstoppable, began to crumble. The fallen angels, that third of heaven's hosts who had chosen the path of pride, felt their corrupted power wane, their false confidence shatter. They were overcome not by a greater force of destruction, but by the overwhelming, irrefutable power of divine truth and goodness. Dragged by an irresistible spiritual force, like stars violently wrenched from their celestial orbits, Lucifer and his entire legion of rebellious followers were cast out. Downward they plunged, away from the radiant light of God's presence, away from the harmonious realms of heaven, hurled into an abyss, a realm of outer darkness and spiritual desolation, specifically prepared for them. Lucifer, the light-bearer, became Satan, the adversary, his glorious name forever tarnished, his splendor buried in the ignominy of his fall. Heaven fell into a profound, solemn silence, a hush that bore the immense sadness of an irreparable loss, the deep sorrow of a family torn apart. The war had left deep scars, a wound in the heart of paradise that only the infinite love and mercy of God, in time, could truly heal. The faithful angels, weary but victorious, felt the immense weight of the battle on their souls. Yet, they knew that light had triumphed over darkness, that truth had prevailed over deception, and that humility had overcome pride. Faith, hope, and selfless love, those virtues which can never be ultimately defeated, had carried the day. In this hard-won victory, heaven relearned an eternal truth. Good always triumphs over evil. Not by superior force alone, not by mere violence, but because goodness is the very essence of God, an unquenchable light that no darkness, however profound, can ever truly extinguish. Pride, hatred, and ambition may fight fiercely, may cause immeasurable pain and destruction, but they are ultimately fleeting shadows when confronted with the enduring purity of love, humility, and faithfulness. The battle had ended. Heaven, though wounded and forever changed, remained at peace, a peace now tinged with a sorrowful wisdom. And Michael's faithful, humble cry, "Who is like God?" now echoed not as a battle challenge, but as an eternal, immovable truth in every corner of the universe, a timeless reminder that God's glory is infinite, and that nothing, not even the brightest, most magnificent created light, can ever surpass his love or his sovereignty. The first great conflict was over, but its repercussions would soon extend to a new creation, to a fragile world called Earth. The expulsion was absolute. After the cataclysmic battle, the very fabric of heaven seemed to open and then seal itself, casting out the rebels into a realm far removed from the divine effulgence. Lucifer, once the resplendent morning star, now irretrievably Satan, the adversary, along with his legions of fallen followers, was hurled far from the light, dragged into an abyss of profound darkness and spiritual desolation. In the act of their expulsion, heaven itself seemed to tremble, then settle into a new, more somber, yet ultimately purified, equilibrium. The angels who had once been the most beautiful, the most powerful, those whose light had rivaled the very stars, now fell like a rain of banished meteors, cast into a lower world, a state of chaos and shadow, an eternal exile where the direct beatific vision of God's glory could no longer be seen or felt. For Satan, this fall was not merely a change of location, but a profound and agonizing transformation of being. The total separation from God, from the source of all light, life, and joy, was a wound infinitely deeper, more tormenting than any physical punishment could inflict. The underworld to which he and his followers were confined was not yet the final hell described in later prophecies, but a state of utter spiritual isolation, a chaotic shadow realm bereft of divine order, peace, and holiness. It was like a shattered dream, a dark, distorted reflection of the heavenly perfection they had willfully abandoned. This expulsion meant the end of Lucifer's original, glorious purpose. Yet, in his unyielding pride and incandescent rage, his hatred did not diminish. It merely morphed, finding a new, twisted mission. If he could not attain God's glory for himself, if he could not rule in heaven, then he would dedicate his existence to destroying, or at least corrupting, God's glory wherever else he found it. From the depths of this abyss of despair, his malevolent gaze turned towards God's newest creation, towards that fragile, material world the Creator had revealed, and particularly towards humanity, the beings made in God's image, the beings for whom the Son of God would one day condescend to die. A bitter, venomous thought took shape in his twisted mind. If he and his fallen host could not bask in God's presence, then these humans, these creatures of dust, who had, in his warped perception, stolen his rightful place of adoration before God's throne, certainly did not deserve it either. That love, that goodness with which humanity was created, would become the prime target of his relentless hatred. His motivation was now chillingly clear: to sabotage the divine work, to corrupt the purity of creation, to drag humanity down into a similar state of rebellion and separation from their loving Creator. The expulsion of Lucifer and his army of fallen angels, therefore, had a direct and immediate consequence on the balance of good and evil in the cosmos. From that moment, evil began to exist not merely as an absence of goodness, but as an active, organized, and malevolent force. The demons, led by Satan, began to seek ways to exert their insidious influence over the material world, to tempt and corrupt humans, to incite within them the very same sins of pride, envy, disobedience, and despair that had led to their own cataclysmic downfall. God, in his perfect synthesis of love and justice, had allowed this separation. The expulsion was not solely a punishment, but an act of divine justice, a necessary consequence of free will misused. The angels who had consciously and deliberately chosen rebellion, who had rejected God's infinite love and holiness, could no longer dwell in his immediate, sanctifying presence. God's love, even for these fallen beings, never ceased, but his justice demanded that a line be drawn, that order be maintained. Those who had freely chosen to reject the light could not continue to bask in its glory as if nothing had happened. In this act, the equilibrium between God's unfathomable love and his perfect justice was starkly manifested. Justice required separation, yet love still granted the fallen ones their continued existence, albeit in a darkness largely of their own making and choosing. The story of Lucifer, now Satan, did not end with his expulsion. Rather, it extended into the ongoing, unfolding drama of good versus evil in the world. His influence, though limited by divine providence, became a constant, challenging presence. The Bible recounts numerous episodes where Satan appears as the tempter, the accuser, challenging not only mere mortals, but also pivotal figures in the history of faith. His first major act after being cast out was in the idyllic Garden of Eden, the very place where God, with his infinite love, had set the stage for human history. In that perfect garden, Lucifer, cloaked in the subtle guise of a serpent, a creature symbolizing cunning and betrayal, saw his prime opportunity to strip the innocence from the first humans, Adam and Eve, and turn them into the first victims of his cosmic rebellion. With words dripping with seductive doubt, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Genesis 3:1. He planted the seed of suspicion. His technique was not overwhelming force, but a whispered insinuation that, like a subtle poison, invaded Eve's heart, and through her, Adam's, "You will be like God, knowing good and evil." Genesis 3:5. This was the irresistible promise, the same allure that had ensnared him. And humanity fell, dragging the world with them into the shadow of sin and separation. Lucifer, with a single, masterfully executed temptation, had achieved his immediate goal: to mar God's creation, to introduce discord into the divine harmony, to bring the celestial conflict down to the human heart. Centuries later, Satan would appear before God to test the faithfulness of Job, a righteous man. With a mixture of arrogance and cynical defiance, he hurled his accusation. Does Job fear God for nothing? Job 1-9. Satan implied that Job's loyalty was superficial, bought with blessings, attempting to question the very goodness of faith itself. Though Job suffered immeasurably, his ultimate endurance, his refusal to curse God despite his anguish, became an eternal testament to a faith that transcends circumstance, a faith that Satan could not break. And in the New Testament, in a pivotal confrontation, Satan attempted to tempt Jesus himself in the desolate wilderness. After 40 days of fasting, Jesus was confronted with temptations of power, provision, and worldly glory. Satan offered him all the kingdoms of the world in exchange for a single act of worship. Matthew 4:1-11, Luke 4:1-13, revealing his ultimate blasphemous intention: to usurp the worship that belongs to God alone. Jesus' firm rejection of each temptation, his unwavering reliance on Scripture and his Father's will, demonstrated that true power lies not in worldly dominion or miraculous display, but in obedience and love for God. This encounter exemplified how faith and humility can withstand even the most alluring deceptions. The Bible's final book, Revelation, unveils Satan's ultimate fate and his climactic role in the end times. John's apocalyptic vision portrays Satan as that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, Revelation 12-9, the great red dragon, humanity's and God's ultimate foe, determined to corrupt and destroy until the very end. Revelation describes a final, terrible tribulation, a period where evil seems to reach its zenith, and the battle between light and darkness intensifies. Satan, as the mastermind behind the beast and the false prophet, attempts to establish a counterfeit kingdom, demanding worship and unleashing chaos. But this final, desperate rebellion is doomed. Revelation culminates in the decisive, ultimate triumph of good over evil. After the Great Tribulation and the final battle, Satan is defeated, bound, and hurled into the lake of burning sulfur, a place of eternal punishment and complete powerlessness, where he can no longer deceive the nations or influence creation. Revelation 20:10. This act of ultimate justice seals Satan's inevitable fate and that of his followers, an eternity completely and irrevocably separated from God's glory. Satan's fall, as depicted in Revelation, is the ultimate expression of God's sovereignty and the victory of his redemptive plan. God, in his infinite love and justice, allows evil to act, to test, to provide the crucible for free will, but only up to a divinely ordained point. At the end of times, when all has been tested and all choices have been irrevocably made, evil is finally and completely vanquished. This final destiny is not merely a consequence of Satan's actions, but a profound reaffirmation of God's omnipotent power over all creation, and the triumph of his unwavering love, a love most perfectly displayed in the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, the very act Lucifer found so offensive. The cross, which Lucifer saw as God's ultimate humiliation, became God's ultimate victory and Satan's ultimate undoing. The story of Lucifer, from resplendent glory to eternal curse, serves as an eternal warning and a profound theological lesson. It underscores the immense danger of pride, the most insidious of sins, which can corrupt even the most perfect of created beings. It highlights the precious yet perilous nature of free will and the devastating consequences of choosing self over God. It reminds us that evil is real, active, and seeks to infiltrate the human heart, to echo that primordial rebellion. But more importantly, Lucifer's story, when seen through the lens of the entirety of salvation history, ultimately points to the even greater glory of God's unfailing love, his infinite mercy, and his ultimate, inevitable triumph. The battle that began in heaven continues on earth, in the heart of every human being. Satan and his demonic forces still seek to darken the light of every soul. But God's grace, his love embodied in Christ, and his justice are ever present, offering redemption, strength, and the ultimate promise that, although evil may be loud, defiant, and destructive, good, rooted in the very being of God, will always, always have the final say. As it was in heaven, when Michael cried, "Who is like God?" so it will be on earth and for all eternity. The light of God's love, truth, and goodness is invincible, an unquenchable flame against which no darkness, however profound or ancient, can ultimately prevail. The morning star fell, plunging into shadow, but the true light of the world, Jesus Christ, has come, and the darkness has not and will not overcome him.